that through today. You don't need to type it, but it'll be if you want to add in, you can as we're going. So let me tell you about how I approach this. And I know some of you have been involved in planning processes I've been in. And I always want to figure out first, what are the questions you're asking yourselves through this process? So a strategic plan is about what's new in your future. And in order to get there, you want to figure out, why are we doing it now? So really that's kind of that, what are the questions we're asking ourselves, which will actually lead us to what the focus question is. What's the big question you're asking through this process? That helps us identify what's the information we need to have in order to plan well. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's little. We'll find out. And then we'll talk about how we'll get that information. If we need to go talk to people, we want to do a board survey. So you'll see that I have a variety of tools to use, but we don't necessarily have to use all of them. That really leads us to, so we'll after today, my hope is we're going to move into a data collection period, which either could be surveys or interviews to get that information. We'll come back to kind of hear that information and talk about what it means for you all, and it'll actually tee up that day of planning. But let me get started with that first question. I would love to hear from all of you. So what are the questions that you need answered through this process? What's prompting you to do this planning now?
I'll start. I think top for me is kind of, who do we want to be when we grow up, which I think is why we're here. Why do we matter to the community, or why does the community look to us, or what type of information do they look to us to provide?
Keep going. What else, y'all? What other questions?
I think just like engagement, how do we find more effective ways to engage with community? Because I think we have excellent programming and excellent speakers, but how do we resonate with community? How do we engage people? How do we get people to truly participate and attend?
What else?
For me, it's how do we grow so that we're able to have the revenue or the resources to continue to offer the high level programming we do offer, and how to expand that. And then I guess an additional one for me would be pretty fundamental in terms of exactly what is our mission, what are our goals and priorities, what are we trying to do in this. I mean, I'm clearly there's public education piece to it, which I mean the broader public, not schools. And then there's the school piece where we have had some activities too. But beyond that, what should we be doing and what's the priority list?
Further to what Lori mentioned, if we could also kind of nuance our channel, our lane, as opposed to the chamber or as opposed to other worthy organizations. What is, if we, not only are we, what do we become when we grow up, but how do we make sure that we have a cause, a distinction, topics that really fulfill World Affairs Council and not be too broad across too many different elements.
So actually, Bill, you're also saying a little bit, or Lane, I'm going to say, what's our focus? What else? Not that those are, those are just really simple questions to answer. This will take just a minute.
I think we also have different constituencies too. I mean, there's actually a lot in that in regard to like from a business development standpoint is, we have these, like when we did the most recent board meeting, there were about 10 or 12 different takeaways for the development team, and that's a lot. And so if we did focus, what would be kind of the first tranche of goals from the standpoint of, okay, we're hitting corporates, we're hitting donors, members, and then breaking those down even further, because it's such a broad it's a broad task, business development.
I'd also add, in my view, one of our key issues is sustainability. How do we ensure the sustainability of the organization as we transition from a volunteer organization to a staffed professional organization?
I've said this before, Liz, it really isn't, I think we should be thinking about it throughout all of our process. We are very, very white organization. We need to increase diversity on our board. We need to increase, racial, cultural diversity. We need to be more reflective of the community from a board perspective, but also kind of how we think about our everything, our programming. I just think, age, diversity, that needs to be kind of really front of mind moving forward.
Okay, so I'm assuming we've gone on that. If you look at that, as you look at all those questions, what do you notice?
We don't know who we are.
Yeah, I mean, so here's what I'm saying, you all. I'm just because you're looking at it, it really is. What I'm hearing you is about role and impact. It's those two. And if those words don't resonate or other ones do, throw them in.
Well, I think everybody's talking about the future too. It's like we know we're at a point where I think the future is promising and good, and how do you build for it? But it's pretty future oriented in the questions being asked.
Liz, and I would say, I think I agree with role and impact. And I think also something that I think is important to all of us simply for longevity and to have the role and impact is fundraising and funding.
Yeah, so the thing is, and this is that thing to be cautious about, is as we're figuring out, it really is something about, it's really what is our role, it's either what does our role and structure need to look like in the future to have the greatest impact. Role and structure is around mission, it's around how you organize it, it's around your audiences, it's around your programs. You're taking a look at all of you, the whole piece. It isn't like, how do we make this? And here's my guess, is the clearer that comes to you, the easier it is to language it to other people who want to participate with you. Remember, people give us money because they have a need for what we do, but they can't do it themselves. And that's whether you're a grantor, a foundation, an individual. So we have a need for what other people do, but we can't do it, and that's why we give them. If you think about your own, how you allocate your donor dollars, that's often why we do that. Unless it's truly just a relationship, and I want you to pay attention to that one. Unless it's just a relationship donor, and that's usually a short-term donor. People will give to something because you're on the board. You get off the board and they're not giving it to you anymore. Yeah. So when I think about a focus question, it's that holder question, that the whole process is about answering that. And so as you're looking at that, what do you see that focus question, the elements of that focus question? I don't know, Liz, that's why we hired you, because you're supposed to be doing it. It usually starts with what or how. Is it how will we clarify and expand our role to increase our impact? Is it, I'm going to write stuff down and then just play with it?
Yeah, I think we have more, really should have more how questions than what questions. We probably need to be process oriented. How do we get from where we are to where we want to be? I think
So
we know a lot of the what questions, mission priorities, focus. Um, we could say our audience is every citizen in the state of Tennessee, but on a practical basis, we need to obviously narrow that down to people who um, either are interested or could be convinced to be interested that what's going on in the world is important to them.
yeah, so here's the one thing, Pat, I'll tell you. When I hear that kind of what is our mission, what is our priority, what is it, your role isn't clear. So it may be clear to you, but I'm not sure it's clear to the whole, and that may be a piece of it. And so the one thing I really try to avoid is a lot of navel gazing in this process, just so you know. We don't just have to ask questions to ask them, but if it's really saying, because I've heard, what is our lane? What is our focus? What is our mission? What are our priorities? That's a lot about your role. Yes, no, maybe.
Well, we
I don't
spent
know.
some time on our mission statement, and it could probably be improved some. It seems to be boilerplate in line with mission statements of most of the World Affairs Councils around the country to help people in our community understand what's going on in the world, to make them better citizens and more interested in what's important in the global landscape. So I don't know if some of these questions might just be for the purpose of having some questions to work with.
Be careful about that. So be careful, because that's why I want us to kind of respect this piece, because it will help us know that. So there may be a piece, it may be, how do we clarify our role in infrastructure to increase our impact significantly? So you're not engaging this to add one or two. As I've been hearing you talk, one of the challenges is your mission is broad. It's a very broad mission, which may be exactly what it needs to be. So your work through the plan is actually focusing that mission and how you're going to implement that over the next, think, 5 years. Does that resonate? So that's where it is, kind of that notion of short term is how do we clarify the role, and infrastructure is a lot of what you're talking about. And I put this word in here so we can take it out, to increase our impact significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. How's that for a holder question to begin with? Anybody, yes?
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Because that starts letting us know, think about that, of who would be helpful to go talk with about your role, to get their perspective, to help you all look at that in the future.
Liz, just before you go too much further, for my edification, what's your definition of infrastructure in this context?
Kind of staff board roles, how you're going to create the whole mechanism for this stuff to happen. It could be how you deliver programs. So infrastructure is big.
Does that encompass the sustainability issue that I'm concerned about?
I would think about it, because I don't know how you have infrastructure unless you can sustain it.
Okay.
Now we can add that in there, Jim.
If we all understand that it's in there, I'm fine with it. I just think it's something that is an absolute mission critical issue for us. Is how do we go forward when Pat says, I've had enough? What are we going to do? Right now, we would be out of business.
How's that? How do we clarify our role in infrastructure to increase our impact significantly and create and ensure, I think that's the word.
Yeah, it's a better word.
A sustainable organization. Or actually, somebody just talked that it's a sustainable future.
Okay.
That's why this question is really important, even though it might feel like a little bit of wordsmithing right now, because it anchors everything. At the end of our time together, you should be able to come back and say, how did we answer this question? This is how we answered it. That's why it anchors it all.
Mhm.
So I'm curious. So a lot of times you want to go out and get some information from other people or from other sources because it's going to help you plan well. So planning, when you think about looking to the future, there are, hey, Jeff, are you on?
Yes. Yes.
Good. There's a link in the chat. Can you see it yet?
No.
I didn't think so. Let me put it in there again. It's to a shared document that you'll see
Okay.
we're working off of.
Okay.
There you go. That's all I wanted to make sure of, that you could get that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is to think about who might we want to go speak with or talk with or get information about for us to plan well. Because the ingredients of this, if you think about it, a little bit is always looking back on what the organization has done, because we build from our strengths. So we want to look at that piece. We want to look at a little bit of what's happening in the world today, what's going on that we need to pay attention to. And then there is that kind of dreaming into the future, is that what do we need to see in place in order to best answer this question, in order to best impact significantly. And I just want to, is your work really important right now? This work is
Yes.
essential right now, isn't it? This is
Yeah.
not like, sometimes it's nice. This is necessary work. Because without it, what happens?
No future.
Yeah, I just want to, when y'all came to me and said, hey, is this something to be interested in? I was like, wow. And no, I did not know about you. When I heard, it was like, of course, this is important and essential work. So with that, when you think about who do we need to get information from? And just so you know, it's not going to be 50 people, but who do we need to get information from?
The business community, students, community at large.
When you say business community, who do you
Payers.
think of?
I think, I'm thinking in terms of funding. So anybody.
Okay, so we're going to get, so I want you to think, Lori, as we're kind of going through that thinking, the more specific you can get, the better.
Okay.
And what you want to do is, one, you want to talk to people who know you in some respect so they can give you some feedback. So this it's really difficult to go do like, I've never heard about these people. It's hard to give them any information. You may decide as part of your plan you want to go out and reach out to them. But who knows you? So I want you to think about who are some of your partners that could give you some very valuable information, and they may be your board. I don't know.
Board. Yeah.
Anybody else come to mind?
I think about it from the perspective, we've got an audience out there that's segmented into several big categories: high school education, college education, general public. So that might be, one way to think about key constituents or key consumers of what we're trying to do. So if we want to get input from others, that would be one pool of contacts to work with. Partners is certainly another one. Chamber.
And who are those?
I would say that historically they've been the Chamber, they've been Belmont, they've been JAST. Those are our three key, I would say.
Sister
What was the
City.
last?
Japan America Society.
Say that again, Lori, I'm sorry.
Japan America Society of Tennessee and sister cities, I would say.
Yeah. And we have a pretty good working relationship with the Japanese consulate. It's the only consular office in Nashville.
And who else knows you? When you think about in terms of schools?
Lipscomb has some knowledge, Vanderbilt limited, UTK, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, growing. Anything to add?
Siwani, because they attended the event back in the fall, so Siwani.
Mm-hmm.
When
Liz,
you think about
we've
your
had,
go ahead.
sorry, we've had episodic partnerships with various institutions for this or that program. The longstanding relationships are the National Area Chamber and Marietta's Center for International Business at Belmont. And we're now building a relationship with UT Knoxville Center for Global Engagement. And that's Gretchen Neisler. She's now on our board, but she's the vice provost for that program. You know, we've been close with Lipscomb. One of our board members is a professor there, and she shepherded our international career panels. So a lot of the relationships are, you know, we've worked from time to time with MTSU, but, you know, you couldn't really call on very many people at MTSU and ask them who the World Affairs Council is.
And so that in itself is very important information. You know, as you're
sure.
trying to,
Yeah.
yeah. In a high school level, who would you talk with?
The Metro Nashville Public Schools are our primary constituents for our education outreach program, which is called Academic World Quest. We also have continuing relationships with two schools out of state that participate, one in Huntsville, Alabama, and the other in Gwinnett County, Georgia, right outside Atlanta. They don't have local World Affairs Councils that do this Academic World Quest program, so they asked to become involved in ours. And they've been a part of it for going on 6 years now.
Great. Those are people who have experience with you can give you some feedback. They can tell you about how they've experienced you. They can also talk about even what they're seeing missing. They can talk about what their hopes are for you in the future as a piece of information. Yeah. I think that's helpful. And my guess is getting your board involved in that will be helpful too, because they have relationships with you outside of just serving on the board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Cool. So that's what I want to, those, as you're looking at those partners, end up getting, you can, so the other challenge here, and that's why I just paused for a second, is you can get into too much, you don't want to get into analysis paralysis. Too much data is just too much data. So some of it is just to get some impressions from people.
I think some other people that we might want to, if we're going to try to get input, the people we interact with, and think about the general population, the Rotary Club in Nashville, as well as the one in Franklin or Williamson County, one south of us. Has anybody else that stands out?
Yeah, we've regularly brought speakers to the Rotary Club of Nashville at the Wild Horse Saloon, and I've gone out to various Rotary clubs and given presentations, McMinnville and Franklin Breakfast Club, and over in Cookeville, but that's been a while since we did Cookeville.
I think this is Jeff, that you may have mentioned this, and they may fall in that Rotary group, but if I think over the last 10 years of people who were at a lot of the evening events, there were a lot of, I would say retirees, people who were interested in world affairs and were looking for events around town. And I remember at the conference in DC, I was amazed at, I met several people who were there that weren't on a board, but were just had been exposed to different world affairs councils and were just interested in the topic. It's almost like an untapped market, but that also means it's a hard market to define and identify and talk to. But I would think you've kept a list of emails of people who've attended our events as long as I can remember. So those non-affiliated, I don't know what else you call them, people that show up to events would be good to talk to.
Well, we also have 2,500 names on our email list, some of whom are, as Jeff, as you mentioned, have been to events, some of whom participate in the weekly quiz. We, every email address that comes within view, we put on the newsletter list. And, we like other newsletters, people hit the unsubscribe button, but we do have a steady presence of about 2,500 people.
Fabian, hello. If you want in the chat, it's always good to see your face. If you want in the chat is a link to the document we're working on. So we can do, if you want, and I'm going to go down to possible questions as I'm looking, we have about 20 minutes. We can do a quick survey if you want. We can do it through SurveyMonkey. It comes out of my office. We can send it to, you can send a link out to people that if you're trying to get that kind of information from them with some targeted, you want to have different conversations with your partners. A lot of times that's better to have a conversation with them. And that's something I can do for you. Usually they're 30 minutes long. I'm pretty adamant that we don't go much longer with that. And it's about getting their impressions. And so you'll see the questions. But we can also figure out, is there's a survey? If we do a survey, I know some of you are as better versed in it than I am. I would say make it short, 4 or 5 questions to ask people to bring in. Though other reason that you might do that is strategic plans actually have some secondary benefits. Sometimes it's gathering. It's everybody getting to actually be in a room together and talk together. That in itself has a benefit. Sometimes it's around aligning. It's making sure that everybody is aligned, and sometimes it's about engaging. And the act of asking is as important as anything else. So you may say, sometimes you go out and ask because you're also going to follow up with those people post-plan to telling them what you're going to be doing. So that could also be a value in accessing that email list if you want and getting people's opinions without being too worried about the return rate. Does that make sense to you all? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Well, why don't we think about if we can get locked into those questions, then we could also make that happen very easily. And again, we just do a link to the SurveyMonkey and we just put a time limit on it. And then what we'll do is take all that information and compile it so that as you all, before we hit the planning session and during the planning session, we'll use that data. You know, it's weird. A lot of times you know what needs to happen already. It's residing in each of your heads. The coming together during the planning process gets it out. And then sometimes it's through hearing other people's perspective helps you think a little differently. So it's a yes and piece, that it's not like, oh, we need to do everything they say. Oh, sometimes it confirms what we already know. Sometimes it makes us just think a little differently about it. So I'm hitting down, I'm actually creating a new page. So these are oftentimes the possible questions that I use. If you'll scroll down to stakeholder interviews survey. Not that we can't use different ones, of course we can. So usually I love this one. I ask it of everybody. When you think of the organization, what are 3 to 4 words that come to mind? It gives you, it's really what is top of mind around people. Sometimes they give me adjectives, and so they're describing what's happening with it, and sometimes they talk about what the organization does. So I'm going to read these to you, and then you're going to tell me which ones you like and which ones you want to throw out. What do you most appreciate about the council? What are the strengths that needs to be taken into the strategic plan? What are the weaknesses that need to be addressed? If you could change 3 things about the organization, what would it be? And it can't just be more money. So it could be the ability to raise more money. So just so you know. I like this one, 6, given what you just described. What is the role of the council? I think that would be interesting to ask your various constituencies and stakeholders that question. I always love asking, what should you do more of or less of? Key issues they need to be addressing. Who should be partners for the organization? And I always like to ask, what other advice do you have? Now you all, because this is a, well, that's interesting. Somehow it wanted to sign me out. So I am so a couple things. You have access to this document when we're done because it's a shared document, just so you know. So as long as it's up, I'm happy to give you a little bit of time to think through this because sometimes it's hard to think through it in a session. But I'm curious, just first pass, which of those 11 questions do you say, yes, we need to ask that?
I think the first, number one to me is a very stimulating question. I think that's a great one.
I think we should send question 1 through 10 to the board. Every one of those questions, I think, and just to the full board would be really impactful for them to spend a little more time and answer. I think they're all great questions.
Yeah, I like them all.
Anything we're missing? For those of you who haven't responded, what do you think?
I'd like to know how people found out about it. Sorry, I already responded. How did you find out about the World Affairs Council? If it's going to be a broad survey to lots of people, how did you hear about it?
You know, I would maybe also add like so like we talked and we mentioned partners in Nashville community, but what is unique about us? What is our, I don't know, unique contribution to this community?
Yeah, hold on one second. Sorry. My Google decided it was kicking me out. I think that's just rude. Okay, here we go. So one is, how did you find out about us? Marietta, will you say that again?
Please,
That was a great question.
Because, you know, we have mentioned several partners. So like, what is our unique role or what is our unique contribution to the community?
That's beautiful. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm interested in where people go now for the information they're looking to get from the World Affairs Council. Where do they get that now? You know, we've got the UN Association in town. We've got news programs, you name it. It might help us to figure out a little bit of what we're competing with in terms of audience and what's taking what I don't know what else is keeping them from accessing us.
So actually, Jeff, I think a lot of those questions, it could be also where do you get them or where else do you get that information?
Yeah, yeah.
A little bit related to that is with Jeff is how do they want to interact with us? I mean, what is the practical delivery? It might be totally different for a retiree than it would be for a corporate type that might, you know, a retiree might want to go to dinner. A corporate type might want to not even see us. You know, they might want news, you know, type. They might want more like the Russia-Ukraine online. It's hard to know.
So you're saying kind of how would you like to interact with us in person, online, classroom?
Time, yeah. At their corporate setting, or you know, so this is more practical. I mean, this is kind of a what's the delivery mechanism?
Yeah, these are ones that are actually. Some of these are better to be able to do in an interview. It's a lot easier to do that in a conversation than in a survey. So as we're thinking about a lot of these can be to say, hey, now I think, so these like where do you get your information? How would you like to interact? Could be given to the 2,500 emailing list, yes?
Sure.
Okay.
Liz, can I add one? What is it about the council now or in the future that would earn your financial support?
I don't think you're going to get an answer. That's why I'm pausing. So you could say, what do you value most about the council?
I think that's question
ask,
2.
You could ask, how do you support the council now? And then you could ask, so do you ask actively everybody who comes to support?
Yes, in all of our newsletters and everything's got a donate button on it.
I'm not sure I like this question. I'm just going to type it. Why wouldn't you support the council? And what's your return rate on those buttons?
Not very big.
Yeah.
The people on our newsletter list like things free. We just did a couple of sessions with former ambassador of Germany on the Ukraine crisis, and we invited as a partner the American Council in Germany, and they pushed our participation rate up to about 200 registrations and $1,300 donation per session.
So what you may be finding out, Pat, and this is where the discovery comes in, I don't want to jump to the end, but you may find out that your resources are going to be developed differently than individual donations. And that honestly, individual donations may be a way of people engaging with you, but that I don't know that, but it's that piece of understanding. I don't know anybody who doesn't like getting something for free.
Right. Especially
Unless
if it's over the internet.
Well, unless there's so many ads on it that it's easier to pay for it than have to weed through them. Right? Anybody in here a Spotify user? I know that's a hot topic right now. You go premium because you don't want to deal with the ads.
Oh.
You know, you think about it, those are those things. The reason we wouldn't go free on the internet is because it's too much it's not worth it. Okay.
Liz, do you have any concerns with that line, those three questions at the end, that people would view this as a solicitation for funds and not just trying to get their perspectives?
I think that if they're done more in a conversation way, then I think we can ask it. I think if it's in a survey, then people have to it's in your survey questions, you want them so simple that people don't have to interpret the question.
Mhm.
And I'm not a big one. I don't want to like throw a bunch of Likert scale questions onto the survey. I just don't think it gives you that kind of information. And that's why if we could keep it 1 to 4, who will respond to you are either people who really appreciate you and are willing to take the time because they love you, or people you have annoyed, and so they're going to give you that feedback as well. Typically, people who are pretty neutral oftentimes don't fill out a survey. They already know what
It's like with student evaluations. It's either the ones who love you or who really hate you.
Exactly. Okay, so with this notion around how do you find out what's our unique role, where else do you get your information now? How would you like to? So that really is about from a specific, almost a perspective of the organization. Those next 4 are about people's relationship with the organization. So if you're cool with it, you're going to give me some permission to go play with this a little bit.
Yeah.
What are we missing?
Liz,
Yeah.
we spend a lot of our time and energy and money on education for high school students and some programs for college students, and they don't have deep pockets. So what we do for them, you know, our revenue comes from other sources, whereas speaker programs could be their own revenue source.
They could be.
Is there a question in here to the at-large audience about how much do they value the services that we provide in education outreach? Something in the vein of,
Well, I think what do you value most about the council is what you'll get it to. Be careful in this one that we're leading. You don't want to lead too much, Pat. But
Okay.
I think that if you ask about what you value most, then you're going to find out what that is. They're not going to answer your questions they're not going to answer your big questions for you. It's just one to see what you want to make sure is that what they value is in line with what you value as an organization. Right? There's a little bit of like, oh yeah, we've got that. Yeah. And the caution I would just have a little bit, and you can always push back against me for real. Oftentimes we're meeting in person, there's a koosh ball and you're allowed to throw it at me. is we get caught up in the thing around needing support. We need the resources, we need the resources, we need the resources, we need the resources. And what my experience has been, the clearer you get about who you are, the clearer you get about what your messages are, the easier it is to go out and develop those relationships with other people who have a need to give you money. So, all right. Last comments on questions? Yeah. You're muted.
Yeah, so you sort of asked what I had wanted to ask, how did you find out about us? But I'm more interested in a more rounded feedback. It's like, I honestly, I'm ashamed to say that until Mayor Dean asked me to be part of this board, I really didn't know much about this group. And so I'm thinking of like a politician that campaigned for office. Like, why people know me, why people don't know me, what do I need to do to for people to know what I want them to know about me. So the question is, not only how did they find out about us, but what do they know about us? Why don't they know about us what we want them to know about us? Like, sort of like more like a poll that we could do, or some kind of a survey or something that will give us a sense of how the community knows or doesn't know about us. I mean, what are the boundaries or the dynamics of the situation? I wasn't here from the beginning of the meeting. I apologize. So maybe you guys already talked about something like this, but that's kind of what I'm curious about. I mean, this is such a cool group. I'm surprised I didn't know about it before Mayor Dean told me about it. And so what was the issue? Why is that I didn't know?
So I think that's a question that you as a board are going to, excuse me, will struggle with at your planning session. Because you got to walk in thinking, as if you didn't know about it, other people didn't know about it either. So why they didn't know about it becomes a whole nother question that you have to ask yourselves. And here's my guess. Our focus is on creating programs. Our focus is on doing the work. Our focus is not always on spreading out what we know. And so I think your question is really spot on. And hopefully, my hope is that it gets answered through the process. But it's almost impossible to ask somebody, how didn't you know about it? I didn't know about it. Maybe I heard about it somewhere, but why didn't I know about it? Well, I had no immediate need for it. Okay. I realize we're hitting up right around 4 o'clock. What I'd love to do is play a little bit with these. Lori, I love your idea about 1 to 10. Sending that out to the board members as a survey, which we can certainly do. I love kind of taking, looking at these and picking out like the maybe 4 or 5 questions to send out to a survey and framing it up that you're engaged in a strategic planning process and would love to have input from those who have attended any of your sessions, any of your programs. With your permission, I'll talk to Pat and Jim about who, does it make sense? Because I think a lot of these are very key. I will talk to stakeholders. So Lori, it's like right now, I think you kind of fit with Chamber, don't you? So I don't think I need to have another conversation with the Chamber, do I?
We've been, I think, the longest, along with Belmont. Jeff pulled me in, probably the longest financial supporter. I think we've been a true partner. We partner on everything. So, we have a very strong interest in making sure that we're on the right path moving forward. And I think that the main question of how do we get the greatest impact and get sustainable gets answered. And Ralph may have different perspectives than I do
Okay.
on the board, and he is interactive. So I think there could be some benefit from a
Sure.
30-minute, maybe with Ralph's perspective. I mean, we could do it with Belmont. We could do it at the same time if you want kind of the two partners that have been in it with the World Affairs Council the whole time. But
Okay. And who would it be with Belmont?
Marietta and Jeff, maybe
Okay.
Dean Guardial.
Okay. So
Speaking for you, Marietta.
does that make sense? Okay. So again, with the
And Liz, somebody mentioned Sister Cities. We've been close to them for quite a long time.
and who would I talk to there?
Sarah
Sarah
Lingo.
Lingo.
Why do I know this person? Okay. Sarah, sorry.
Lingo,
one thing I wanted-
Lingo.
Okay. And I can get with you all offline, you all to do this, but that's what I'm looking at. So I want to think about if we did it with the chamber, we did a conversation with Belmont. We did it with Sister Cities. Tell me if we need to do it with the Japan American Society. I don't know if I got that right, or with the council. And then, go ahead.
The Tennessee Latin American Chamber of Commerce. The one thing about New Americans, we are in outside the US, when you read news of the world, it's really news of the world. It's not just news about another state. So we tend to be more dependent on what happens in other parts of the world, and we're more interested in world news. So I think you were going to find that the New American community may be more receptive to getting that sense of information. So I would suggest working with the New American chambers, like the Chinese chamber, like the Asian American chamber, the Tennessee Latin American chamber, that sort of thing.
Okay, so I want you all to think about this. Pick two. I hate to do that right now, but we got to also know that I don't have the bandwidth to go out and do 15 interviews. 7, 8. So I want you to, and actually with that 5 minutes, I want you to think about who has enough relationship or knowledge about the council to give us information. Because some of these people, if they don't, it'll probably be part of your beginning planning work. Once you're implementing, it'll be about going to reach out with them. So think about that and let me know what makes sense. Yeah, but I totally agree with you that how do you, and it gets into the whole notion of how do we increase our diversity within throughout is how do you reach out. So I'm just going to put the New American chambers. Yeah. Okay. So if you're okay with this, as we're hitting on 4 o'clock, Jim and Pat, I'm going to put this into an email and ask you for who might be those contacts, things like at both any other universities as well as any of the high schools. And usually what I'll do is set out, give you an introduction that you can just introduce the two of us together, and then I can connect to create that. So what I'd like to do, you all, is do a little fine tuning with this. I don't know if this makes sense yet. Tell me how you're best to roll. I can put this all back into an email to you for you all to look at and approve. We can come back online for a 30-minute. What works best for you all?
I feel like, after what we have discussed, I think there is an agreement and consensus on things at least so far moving forward. So I feel like an email will be sufficient, at least on the things we have discussed.
Great. Does that make sense to people? I hate to limit interaction, but I also know that Zooms get really tiring after you're on them all day. So let me get this together over the next week and get that out so that we can start with the conversations rolling, you all. And then what we'll look to is probably our dates in. Jim, when's our planning date? I have it somewhere. April 14th.
Yeah, our full board meeting is the 27th of April.
Yeah, so the 14th is the day that we have associated for planning. So just so you know, we're great on time. So what I'm thinking is we'll probably get back together sometime in March so you can kind of hear what I'm hearing. Make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Well, hey, Pat and Jim, will you hang on for a second so we can get some of our logistics figured out? For the rest of you,
Okay.
thank you so much for your time. We'll be back in touch. Enjoy your Thursday. There's still some
Thank you.
sunlight out there.
All right.
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.